The thing nobody tells you about dying is how quiet it gets. Not the dramatic silence of movies, not the operatic fade to black, just a settling, like the world stepping back to give you room. And I remember thinking, in that strange calm that came over me in the emergency room, after the monitors had been screaming for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, I remember thinking, this isn't so bad. This isn't fear at all. And that surprised me more than anything else that happened that night. My name is Catherine Mercer. I'm 53 years old, and I died for 28 minutes in the cardiac care unit at St. Joseph's Hospital in Milwaukee on the night of October 14th, 2022. I'm not telling you this for shock value. I'm telling you because what I experienced in those 28 minutes has made it impossible for me to look at the world the same way. And what Jesus showed me, what he pointed to specifically, deliberately, with a weight in his voice that I can still feel when I wake up at 3 a.m, has kept me awake every night since. Not because it was terrifying in the moment, because it wasn't, but because of what it meant for all of us, for this country, for the week that he said was the last normal week. And we're living in the after now. We have been for months. If you're new to this channel, subscribe. I don't make these videos for fame. I make them because what I was shown is not mine to keep. It was given to me to share. And if you've ever had your own encounter with the other side, or if you're sitting there with questions you can't ask anyone else, drop your experience or your question in the comments. I've read every single one. I respond when I can. And I promise you, you will not be judged here. Let me go back to that night because the beginning matters. I had a massive cardiac event. I was at home and I felt this pressure in my chest like someone had parked a car on top of me. My husband called 911. The paramedics got there fast. 8 minutes, he told me later. But those 8 minutes felt like a lifetime. I remember the look on his face. I remember the lights of the ambulance painting the ceiling of our bedroom in red and white. And I remember the sound of the monitors in the ER, this specific pattern, this rapid beeping that wasn't like in the movies where it's one long, continuous tone. It was faster than that, more frantic, like the machine was arguing with my heart, demanding it come back, demanding it remember what it was supposed to do. And then the beeping changed. It became a single sustained tone. Not the flat line you hear on television, but something that had a texture to it, a thickness, like the sound itself was grieving. And in that moment, I felt my body let go of something, like a hand releasing a rope, and everything became very, very still. The doctors later told me I was clinically dead for 28 minutes. They used that word, clinically, like death was a classification system, a box to check. But in that moment, I didn't feel like a medical case. I felt like I had been invited somewhere, and someone was waiting for me. I want to tell you about the clinical part first because I think it matters. When you die, when your heart stops, there's a sound the machines make. It's not the dramatic flat line. It's a descending tone like a piano key being held and then slowly released. And then silence. Not the silence of absence, the silence of anticipation, like the whole room is waiting for something. And in that silence, I felt myself being drawn upward. Not in the way you might imagine, not floating like a balloon, more like being called forward. Like something was pulling me by the collar of my shirt, gently, insistently, toward a light that I couldn't see yet but could feel. The nurses and doctors were working on me. I know that now from what my husband told me. Chest compressions, the paddles, the whole thing. But I wasn't there with them. I was somewhere else entirely. And I need to describe this transition carefully because it wasn't what I expected. There was no bright light that overwhelmed me, no sudden flash that blinded me. It was gradual, like your eyes adjusting to darkness, like stepping from a noisy room into silence. And in that silence, I became aware of a presence, and then another, and then I saw him. That's when I saw him. Jesus was not what I expected. I know that's a strange thing to say, but I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I had my first communion, my confirmation. I thought I knew what Jesus looked like based on every painting I'd ever seen. The long hair, the beard, the robes. And he did look like that in a way. But there was something about him that the paintings never captured. A solidity. a presence that made the paintings look like children's drawings. He wasn't glowing in the way that sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but he was aware, fully, completely aware. And he was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as purposeful, like he had been waiting for me, like this was a scheduled appointment that he had been keeping. He was accompanied by someone, a figure. I don't know how to describe this person except to say that they were familiar in a way that made no sense, like someone you know from a dream you had when you were a child. They didn't speak to me directly. They were there, present, like a witness or an escort. And together, Jesus and this figure led me forward. Not into a cloudy tunnel, which is what I always expected from the stories, into something else entirely. A space that didn't have a shape, a place that was more like a feeling than a location. And then Jesus spoke, and he said something I need you to hear. He said, "This was the last normal week in America." I need to stop here for a moment because I know how this sounds. I know that there are people who hear things like this and immediately discount them. They're too specific, too dramatic, too convenient for a YouTube title or a sensational headline. I understand that. I really do. And I spent months after my recovery trying to convince myself that I had imagined it or dreamed it or misinterpreted it. But the voice, the weight of the voice, the deliberate way he spoke, the specific way he looked at me when he said it, I have never in my entire life felt more certain of anything. And I'm not a credulous person. I'm a retired middle school principal. I spent 30 years looking at evidence and making judgment calls. I'm telling you what happened, not what I wish had happened. Let me tell you what Jesus showed me after he said that. He didn't explain it the way I wanted him to. He didn't hand me a calendar or point to a date on some cosmic schedule board. Instead, he showed me a week, a specific week. And I need to be precise here because precision is the only way I can communicate what I saw. The week was the week of September 11th through September 17th, not 2023, which was already past, not some hypothetical future year, September 11th through September 17th. He showed me the week as if I were looking down at it from above, like a map. And he actually pointed with his hand, the way you would point at something on a table, and he said, "This was the last normal week in America. Everything after this week will be different, not all at once, but in ways that will compound, that will accelerate, that will become undeniable." And then he looked at me with an expression that was not cruel, it was not cold, but it was serious in a way that I have never experienced from another human being. And he said, "Remember this, tell them, they need to know that there was a before, that normal is not gone because it feels gone, that they lived through the last normal week and most of them didn't even know it." Now, I know what you're thinking, September 11th through the 17th. That seems arbitrary. That seems like nothing. There was no major event that week that I remember, no catastrophe, no political earthquake. It was just a week. And that's exactly the point. That's exactly what he was showing me. Normal doesn't announce itself. Normal doesn't wave a flag. Normal is just the water you're swimming in until suddenly you're not in it anymore. But here's where it gets harder for me to talk about. Because Jesus didn't stop there. He continued. And what he showed me next is what has made it impossible for me to go back to my old life. What he showed me is what I see every time I close my eyes. He showed me the following months, not in detail, in impressions, in waves, like watching weather patterns from a satellite. And what I saw was acceleration, things that had been slow becoming faster, things that had been distant becoming close, things that had been unthinkable becoming thinkable. And it wasn't one event. It was a accumulation, a compounding, like interest on a debt, like snow rolling downhill, getting bigger, getting faster, unable to stop. He showed me a country that was the same country I knew, but was operating under a different set of rules. Not the rules changing overnight, the rules changing in the margins, in the exceptions, in the things that people said were temporary, the temporary things becoming permanent, the unthinkable things becoming the new normal. And he showed me people, millions of people, who were living in two realities at the same time. The reality of what was and the reality of what was becoming. And the dissonance between those two realities was causing a kind of slow, quiet damage that nobody was talking about because nobody had the language for it. He showed me something else. He showed me that this was not punishment. That was very clear. This was not wrath. This was not God punishing America for its sins. That language, that framing would have been easier to reject, easier to argue with, easier to walk away from. What he showed me was something that I can only describe as consequence, natural consequence, the consequence of choices that were made long before any of us were born, the consequence of systems that were built on foundations we didn't choose, the consequence of momentum. And it was coming regardless, not because God wanted it, because it was what was set in motion. And there was a point, the week of September 11th through the 17th, where the train was still on the tracks, where the deviation had not yet become the new direction, where it was still possible to see what normal looked like. And he showed me that week as a gift, not so that we could go back, but so that we would know what we had lost, so that when things accelerated, we would have a reference point, a before, an anchor. The figure who was accompanying Jesus, the other presence, I need to say something about that, because I've thought about it more than almost anything else. They didn't speak to me in words, but they communicated, and what they communicated was not a message exactly. It was more like a quality, a feeling of being known, of being recognized, like they had been waiting for me specifically. And when I asked without words who they were, I felt an answer that I can only translate imperfectly into human language. It was something like, "You will know when you come back. It will be obvious." And then they smiled. And the smile was so full of something that I can only call recognition. The way you might smile at an old friend you haven't seen in years, that I felt an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. It was homesickness. It was longing. It was the feeling of being away from home for so long that you forgot you were away. And then Jesus said one more thing before I was brought back. He said, "You will return, and when you do, you will have a choice. You can tell people what you saw, or you can stay silent. The silence will be easier. The telling will be hard, but the silence will not protect you. The telling will not destroy you. And the people who need to hear this will hear it from whoever brings it. It doesn't have to be you, but you were chosen, so choose." I came back on the operating table. The doctors couldn't explain it. My husband said the room went quiet, and then someone said, "We have a pulse." And the whole team erupted in this kind of disbelieving cheering. I woke up 3 hours later in the ICU, and the first thing I felt, before relief, before gratitude, was the weight of what I had been told. And the question, do I have the courage to talk about this? Do I have the right? Who am I to be the one carrying this message? I've asked myself that question every day since October 14th, 2022, and I'm still asking it. But I'm telling you anyway, not because I'm special, not because I earned it, but because Jesus asked me to. And because when I think about that week, September 11th through the 17th, I remember it now with a clarity that makes me cry. Because I didn't know. I was living in it. I was in the before, and I didn't know. I was doing ordinary things that week. I was making dinner. I was grading papers. I was watching the news and feeling vaguely uneasy about things I couldn't name. And I didn't know that I was living in the last normal week, that I was standing on the edge of something, that the water was about to recede before the wave. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Not fear. I mean, fear is natural. Fear is human. But fear is not the point. The point is awareness. The point is looking at your life right now, this week, whatever week you're watching this in, and asking yourself, is this the last normal week? Not because normal is guaranteed, but because awareness changes everything. Because if you know that the ground beneath your feet is moving, you can prepare differently than if you think it's solid. I don't know when the acceleration will become undeniable to everyone. I don't have a date. I don't have a prophecy that lines up with Daniel or Revelation. I have a voice and a week and a feeling. And I'm telling you because I was asked to. And because every time I think about staying silent, I think about the people who won't hear it from anyone else. And I can't carry that. I can't carry it alone. That's the other thing Jesus showed me, that messages like this are meant to move through people, not stay locked inside them. They're meant to be passed on, the way a flame is passed from candle to candle. You don't protect a flame by cupping it in your hands. You protect it by letting it light other flames. If you have experienced something similar, an NDE, a vision, a moment of knowing, I want to hear from you. Not to validate my own experience, but because I think we are meant to share these things with each other. I think that the accumulation of testimonies, of stories, of things that don't fit into the rational box, I think that accumulation is itself a kind of evidence, a kind of pattern, and patterns matter. And if you're sitting there thinking, this is insane, this woman had a cardiac event and her brain was oxygen deprived and she had a hallucination, I understand that, I really do. I've considered that explanation more times than I can count. But the voice, the weight of the voice, the specific way Jesus looked at me, the way the figure smiled at me with recognition, I have no framework for that in oxygen deprivation. I have no category for that in brain malfunction. And I don't expect you to believe me because I'm a reliable narrator. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that something real happened and that it's pointing at something. This is Catherine Mercer, and I'm asking you to remember the last normal week, whatever week that was for you, and to pay attention to what comes next. I'm not here to predict the future. I'm here to tell you that someone showed me the past, and that the past is still happening, in the choices we're making, in the directions we're heading, in the things we're choosing to see and choosing to ignore. The before and the after are both real, and we're living in both of them at the same time. And the question is not whether the change is coming. The question is what we do with the time we have to see it coming. Subscribe, share this video if it spoke to something in you, and drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And I believe that the accumulation of our stories, the things we can't explain, the things we don't have frameworks for, might be the most important thing we have. Thank you for listening, and may whatever you believe in give you peace, because we need peace right now. We need it more than we've needed it in a long time. I'll see you in the comments.